They touched the pen. This is a solution that the captain of the Sutton found in 1857 to validate the capture of the native from Solomon and Gilbert's Island. This act, made in front of a delegate of the French government, Mr. Dalmagne, allowed to act the recruitment of 66 men and women of this island to work in the sugarcane fields of Réunion Island, an island located more than 11,000 kilometers. It's necessary to wonder about the interest of such a small number of workers recruited in such distant places. Some data allow us to clarify the context. In Réunion Island, the slavery of Africans, Malagasy, Indians, and Creole was abolished in 1848. Very many freedmen then left the plantations. The problem of arms for work in the sugar factories then appears for the owners. Between 1848 and 1860, Réunion will no longer be able to recruit contract workers or slaves, neither on the African coast, nor in Madagascar, nor in India, except in small quantities due to the hostility of the colonial or local powers governing this country, in particular Portugal and England. During these years, in France, the political will be to colonize or increase colonization very diverse areas, Algeria, Caledonia, Polynesia, or Indochina. For this purpose, the government wished to have docile workers foreign to these territories and trained in the former colonies. Through various archives, we know the exact route of this ship, authorized to recruit South Pacific Islander. A lawsuit before the courts of Mauritius, after the delivery of workers to Réunion Island, specifies the travel condition, the atmosphere, the behavior of each other. Above all, the conditions for the capture of workers are specified for each island in the South Pacific. The main organizers of this deportation are well known. Mr. Joubert, Franco-Australian, trader and industrialist, plays a major role in this story. Mr. Chateau, Franco-Mauritian, is a complex character, present in Australia, Paris, Réunion Island, and Mauritius. He will organize the trafficking in human beings. It's a real new slave trader. But these two men only use the possibilities offered by complicit governments to carry out their actions. The attitude of justice, mainly in Mauritius, is rather lax, and it's only through the pressure exerted by the Australian newspaper that this story will be revealed. In Réunion Island, the silence will be total, both on the part of the governor and the media. This communication is based on the research work of Dorothy Schoenberg and Karen Speedy. They were interested to the case of the Sutton. Both conclude their writing by noting the ignorance of the fate of the 66 Polynesians and by the need for further research. By using the archive of Réunion Island, as well as those of France or London, we were able to discover what became of the 66 people. A letter addressed to Mr. Chateau in October 26, 1856, signed by the director of the interior of Réunion Island, allow to date the start of the project. He say, the administration authorized you to implement the introduction to Réunion of workers recruited from the island of the Pacific Ocean. In October 31, 1857, the report from Mr. Dalmain, delegate about the Sutton, allowed us to specify the role played by the French state and by the governor of Réunion is a validation, but also the doubts from the start of the feasibility and honesty of this recruitment. According to Dorothy Scheinberg and London Archive, Mr. Meadow, one of the Westerners embarked in Byron as an interpret, complained to the American consul at Mauritius and tried to institute proceedings against the Captain Wilson. In search of redress for his own grievance, Ferrier, another Westerner embarked in Byron, petitioned William Stevenson, the governor of Mauritius, on 8 December 1857, in the course of which he related the whole story of the Sutton voyage. In January 1858, Stevenson sent a letter enclosing the deposition to the governor of Réunion Island, asking for an explanation. The fundamental question was whether the Gilberts were British possession or not. The fundamental difference between a slave and an indentured worker lies in the existence of a real contract and in its acceptance. The slave is captured, deported definitively, without being asked for his opinion, is only a cattle for the traders. The indentured worker knowingly signs a contract of which he understands the term, duration, time, nature of work, place of work, etc. In the case of the South Pacific Islander, it is obvious that they understand only a few words of the interpreter, that they were led to believe that it was about 10 months' work in the neighboring island for harvesting copra. They are totally unaware that they are going to live for a period of at least 5 years to work the sugarcane in an island 11,000 kilometers away. When they touch the captain's pen, it only makes sense for the captain and the French delegate. The political records show the fraudulent character of the captain action, Mr. Chateau project. Mr. Chateau's project involved the recruitment of 300 South Pacific Islanders on 2 occasions. However, there will only be one trip with only 66 workers. This made it possible that no South Pacific Islander died during this long journey. The food and water were planned for a much larger number. This project was not very serious and will end in a financial debacle. This action, truly a slave trade, ended with the death of the 66 islanders shortly after their arrival on Réunion Island. We must also remember the revolt about the Sutton of at least 2 people who were abandoned by the captain on an island several hundred kilometers from their place of capture. Finally, the presence on board the boat of a dozen captured women is very poorly informed and justified. It's a very long crossing, 11,000 kilometers, foremost of sea travel. A first stopover on July 4, 1857, in the Fiji Island, where it will be impossible to recruit any worker. After, the boat went to the Gilbert Island and arrived on the island of Byron. It took on board 6 natives, including a woman, as well as 2 white men. On August, the boat arrived in Peru, and around 20 people embarked on the promise of a contract lasting 10 to 12 months. The next day, the boat headed for Clark Island, where he recruited 13 or 14 workers. The Sutton then heads for the Solomon Islands, which he will reach after 6 days of navigation. This ship then heads for Torres Strait. He stopped at Sabre Island, but it will be impossible to recruit any native. This will be the last stopover before the long crossing of the Indian Ocean for almost 2 months. What have they become? Arrived at Réunion Island, there is a curiosity for savage. They are described as follows. Their lime-sucked hair was of a yellowish tint. Their heads appeared to be covered with a sheepskin cap. The women were not lacking in a certain beauty. Spread over a few properties, these unfortunate people have never been able to get used to walking the land. They were wiped out by nostalgia. The last one died 2 years ago. The distribution of indentured workers will be done on 3 properties. 2 properties in the east of Réunion Island and 1 in Saint-Leu in the southwest. On this property, 10 South Pacific Islanders, then called Caledonians, will be in the presence of indentured workers of very different origins. 180 Indians, 79 Malagasy, 166 African, and 20 former free slaves. The working day was from 4 a.m. to 9 p.m. From working the copra to cutting the sugarcane, it is an anthropological shock. Of course, these workers will always live on Iceland, but the work, the food, the language, and the social organization will be very different. As the death record of these people show, most of them will die soon after arriving. Very quickly, melancholy, psychological distress, nostalgia will be the cause of their death. This table indicates their name, their age at the time of death, their work in the plantation, the name of the owner, and the commune where they lived. The last one died in 1882. We can notice that if most of them worked in the fields, the women are also servants. It should be noted that the surnames indicated are those written by the French employees as they were understood. In the statistic of governor of Réunion Island, these people are said to be from the Gilbert and Solomon Islands and classified with African, well distinguished from Indians. Here, we find a relevant distinction between indentured workers, Indian people, and those fraudulently captured and treated as slaves, African, Malagasy, Comorians, and South Pacific Islander. On November 1858, the French Minister of Algeria and the colonies ordered the governor of Réunion Island to stop the recruitment of Polynesian immigrants. There were too many political problems with England and also moral problems because this immigration looked too much like the slave trade. After the end of this immigration from the Pacific, the question of available arms will always remain important for colonial society. It will first consider the transfer of Kanak to Réunion Island to civilize them. Then it will be considered to deport the Indians already used to working in Réunion Island to go to work in Algeria. Then, after the South Pacific Islander deported to Réunion, the same process will take place in Peru. Human trafficking in the Pacific Ocean area will increase. If Réunion Island was a pioneer for this human trafficking, many others will continue this process. It seems obvious to us that from 1862, the deportation to Peru or the practice of blackbirding was equivalent practice to the detriment of the South Pacific Islander. Thank you for your attention.